Okay, so we're continuing on Chav Ches on the base. We started the Mishnah last week, and what the Gemara is doing is giving us a series of Mishnahs with a logical continuation of what you do when you find a Metzia, how long you have to hold it, do you have to hold it, can you sell it? The Gemara is going through all of that right now, and last week we touched on the Mishnah about Simonim. We ended I guess it's the two dots, which are about halfway down from the wider line, not the widest, but the middle part of the wide lines is two dots.
I'm sorry, what daf are we on? Kuf Tes Amud Beit?
Chav Ches.
Ches, thank you.
Ches on the base, yeah. Baruch Hashem, we've gotten this far. And it starts with Haramai. So you remember that the Gemara is telling us something interesting with a drasha from the words Adarosha Chicha. From Adarosha Chicha, it doesn't mean that you interrogate or question the person, the finder. It goes to the person who is coming to collect, and you have to check to see if he's a Rama, if he has a reputation for cheating, because there are people who may, and the Gemara alludes to this, they hear that something was lost, they stretch their ear a little bit, they hear, oh, it was a red shirt, oh, this or that, and they come waltzing in and give some simanim, and if no one else does, they get it. So the Gemara tells us that we're trying to shut that down. So we don't even accept what we call more generic simanim, like a color. A color isn't acceptable because anybody can hear that there was a red shirt missing or a diamond that had a certain cut or something. So it has to be what the Gemara said last week is simanim muvhakin. Muvhakin means it's not just a run-of-the-mill siman, it's a muvhak. A muvhak means sort of an expert. In other words, yes, it was a diamond with a I don't know, cushion cut with 3 diamonds on each corner. In other words, you know more than just what someone would know by hearing scuttlebutt. Okay, so now the Gemara goes on and says, "V'haramai afa pisha omer simoneha harizelo yitinlo." If someone has the reputation of being a Ramai, in other words, it's established that he is a deceitful person, he has to bring witnesses. Simonim don't even work for him. That's what the Mishnah says. Tana Rabbanan. So the Rabbanan learned, but Rishona Kol Misha Avdalo Aveda Hayanosa Simonim Venatla. In the beginning, when they first established this program, Chazal said, "You bring Simonim, we'll believe you. Why not?" A Yid has a reputation of being erlich. We don't attribute anything untoward to a fellow Jew, at least not until we know something. Misha Rabu Haramoim, when the Ramoim, basically, the cheaters, the ones who force their way into this whole program, Iskinu, say then they turned tables, the Chazal did, and they said, you know what, Simonim aren't going to work, you got to bring Adim. Adim are uncontroverted because we bring 2 witnesses. Says, yeah, I know it's his. I know he's been wearing it for 10 years, and this is his, no question. That's the best form of Adis. If it told, and he would take it. Kiha the Avua de Rav Papa, and he brings an example of the father of Rav Papa. Irkaslei Chamra Bishgacha, he lost a donkey and it was found. Also the Kame, the Rabbah, Rav Huna, he came before Rabbah Rav Huna. The told. So the father of Rav Papa was a Choshev Yid, but nevertheless he said to him, bring witnesses. That was the standard program. Bring witnesses, and we'll that you're not a cheater, and we'll give it to you. Also, Isa Sade, he went and brought witnesses. Amalahu, they asked them, Yediam Bey Deramahu, do you know if he is a cheater? Now, notice how they asked the question. Do you know if he's a cheater? Amrale in. They said yes. Now, we know as lawyers or even in the legal system, it's all about how you ask the question. You have to ask the question the right way. So if you ask the question, is he a cheater? And the witness said in, that means yes, he's a cheater. Amalahu, ano, Ramai ano? So the father of Papa said, I'm a cheater? You're telling me that I'm a cheater? Amalei, anan lav Ramai at kamrina. No, we didn't say you were a cheater. We didn't mean to say you're a cheater. Again, it's how they understood the question. Amar Rabba Rabba Huna, Mistabra, Lo Maisa Inish, Chavasa Lanafshe. So we're going to learn something very important from this, that a person who brings a witness against himself. I'd rather not bring a witness at all. If I'm going to bring a witness, I'll bring a witness for me, not against me. So there is a principle that when a witness makes a statement, that statement is definitive. He can no longer go and undo his statement. That's the chazal, that's the halacha. So what happened here? They asked the question, is he a cheater? And the witnesses said yes. So l'chaira, that's a definitive statement that the witnesses can no longer retract. So how is it that they can give it to the father of Papa when the witnesses were definitive? So the Gemara is trying to give us an understanding here that two things. First of all, there's a principle that la maisa inish chavasa l'nafshe, a person as a practical matter will never bring a negative witness against him. That makes sense. And secondly, where a question it was raised ambiguously and the answer, they thought they were being asked a question and they answered without thinking of the question. So the question was, is he a cheater? And they thought that the question was, is he not a truthful person? So the witnesses themselves were somewhat flummoxed by the question. Says the Gemara that under those circumstances, a witness can retract his statement, even though al pi halacha he's not allowed to. That's the chiddush. The chiddush is that he didn't understand the question, so we're not going to hold it against him, even though halachically asked and answered, right? Asked and answered. So why did he get a second crack? Teretz is because a person doesn't bring a witness against his own interest. And clearly here, it can be shown that the question was raised in a way that the witnesses misunderstood the question. That's the point of this Gemara. But anyway, so in other words, at the end of the day, Rav Papa was cleared and it was all okay. But you see, even the father of Rav Papa required witnesses. They wouldn't accept simanim, even though Rav Papa was Rav Papa. His father, they required simanim. Anyway, so that's the Gemara. Okay, go ahead.
A question. Yeah. So reading this, and I have to keep in mind, I just have the straight Gemara here. I don't have Art Scroll or anything that would actually tell me what this actually means. I read the question here, and I wonder whether this. It sounds like you're saying something different. The end result is the same, but it said Amar hu yidi asan be diramayhu. To me, that means, and this is the way I would sort of quote misunderstand it. Is,
which words are you, Menashe? Which words?
Okay, so it says Amar lahu yidi isun be diramayhu. Okay, so to me that could be meant to mean, do you know whether or not this? Do you know whether this person is a Ramai? And if you ask the question of, do you know if this person's a cheater? I could say yes, as in yes, I know whether this person is a cheater or not.
Right.
Okay, as opposed to the question that presumably was meant to be asked, which is this person a cheater?
Right. And then when you ask an open-ended question that could be answered yes or no, when you say yes.
Right, but more than open, it's not even open-ended. It's a question that could be interpreted literally word for word, not in the way that maybe it was originally intended.
Right, and that's what exactly right, Menashe. And that's what the Gemara is trying to tell us, is that when the question had an ambiguous understanding and that the witnesses were meant to say something and you can understand it. And there's a principle that a person doesn't bring witnesses against interest. That's a principle. So we could take that principle and say the question was unclear enough that that's not what they meant. They meant to say that he was a good guy, not a bad guy.
What I'm saying is that they meant to say in as in, that's one way to say it, but the other way is to say in as in yes to the question of do I know, with maybe the expectation that now the Beis Din's going to ask him the next question, which is, okay, you said yes, you know. Now, what do you know?
Right. So Menashe, let's take a look at the Rashi. Rashi says Omale in. They said in. Because Sovrin, they thought Omalahen, that the question was Yediutun Bey the Lav Ramahu. Do you know that he's not a cheater? That's what they should have asked. They should have asked it in the negative. Do you know that he's not a cheater? That's what the intent was, says Rashi, and that's what they understood.
Right,
So
and
they
then it would
said
have been
in.
unambiguous.
Of course, he's not a cheater, but that's not the way the question was actually worded. That's why it became an ambiguous, and that's why the halacha is that you can't retract, but they allowed him to retract because they understood that the question was not phrased correctly.
Rabbi,
If
Yeah.
the
I'm
question-
sorry, it
if
could
the
also
question
be,
was asked that
Okay.
way. Why do they ask the question that way? How do we know what their intention was? Were they trying to say whether or not the person is credible? Would he know yes or no versus whether the topic was yes or no?
Well, I think, Jay, that the normal question and answer in a bezdin is when a witness comes in, you can say one of two things. What can you tell me about this witness or about this fellow? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Or you could say, like Menashe was intimating, is he a cheater or not?
Well, the
Or
question,
you could say, is he a
Sort of-
cheater?
sort of
In
the
which case
question,
The answer is yes or no, and the answer is no.
the question almost says, do you know this person? Do you know if you have an answer to the question that we're struggling with?
But look at Rashi's words. Rashi is saying something very specific. Kesovrim, the witnesses thought Sha'omalahen, that they were asked, Yidi Usumbe the Lav Ramahu. Do you know that he's not a cheater? That's the way the Bezdin asked the question, says Rashi. Because that's the words they should have used, and they didn't. They didn't.
Those aren't the words. What Rashi is saying,
Rashi's saying that they didn't ask the question correctly. They should have asked, is he not negative, not a cheater? Then the answer is in. He is not a cheater. Again, we have this experience, I don't know, maybe Yale, because if you've ever practiced in court or there's been sort of like a deposition or something like that, you know that you have to phrase a question very specifically. Otherwise, the ambiguity of the answer can later lead to, that's not what I meant. In other words,
thank you, Rabbi. I was going to comment based on the question. You're told in court you always want to give a yes or no answer and don't add on to it.
Right.
So the question was, do you know
He's
whether
not a
he is
cheater.
a
It should have
dishonest?
been, he's not a cheater. It should
Right,
have been-
but it could also be, again, what I was going to say is it may be even more simple than that. And there's the question is, do you know whether he's a dishonest person? And they said yes. Now, yes meaning yes, we do know he's not a dishonest person, but they were waiting for the rest of the question. In other words, they simply said yes, we know an answer to that question, but they didn't add, they didn't elucidate. In other words, do you know
At the
whether
end
he's a
of the
dishonest
day,
person?
Rashi-
Yes, we know.
Yeah, but yeah, at the end of the day, Rashi is telling us the question was phrased incorrectly.
Right.
Because what was really meant here is, do you know that he is not a cheater? And that's not what was asked, but that what was meant to be asked.
Right, but it also means the witnesses also, frankly, the witnesses did not pay attention to they answered the question they thought they were being asked, not the
That's
question they're
exactly
actually
right.
being asked.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
It was a toast. It was a mistake.
They answered the question they thought they were being asked. Exactly right. So now look at the next. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jay. I can't hear you.
We're having trouble with your mic again.
Did you hear the question, Nasha? I didn't hear the question.
No, it's back to being a chipmunk.
Okay. Now take a look at the next Rashi. The next Rashi will help us even further. Mistabra, shezeh hoya daten mitchila. That, in other words, why do we allow the witnesses to retract when the halacha is that a witness can't retract the statement? Says Rashi, shezeh hoya daten mitchila, because that was the intention of the witnesses from the beginning. The halacha is you can't be magid b'chayzer magid, which is what we said. We can't retract. So they're not retracting. They're explaining what they actually said. Says the Gemara, that's okay. And because of the ambiguity of the question, and you can explain what you meant. And the next Rashi, Lo Maisa Inish Chayvel Anafshe, a person doesn't bring a witness against his interest, because Shahaborin Lebezdin, but that when he brought the witnesses to Bezdin, he was 100% certain that that these witnesses would testify on his behalf. He had no havamina. He was bringing witnesses who might say something against him, and because of the ambiguity of the question, it's clear that that was not what was meant. But again, the Gemara is going out of its way, so we should understand that how sensitive this is. You have to give clear testimony. If you don't give clear testimony, it can be held against you. So you have to be very careful. And rather than answer, you might have to say, repeat the question, or I don't understand the question, to make sure that you understand what's being asked and how it's being asked. And that, by the way, that's what we do even in our civil court system. Is a witness should be very careful. You're always advised by your lawyer, don't answer unless you fully understand the question, and don't be embarrassed to say, repeat the question, because you have to understand sometimes either lawyers intentionally or unintentionally ask a question that elicits an answer that turns out to be a bad answer for the person they're testifying for. So again, you have to be very careful, is what the Gemara is telling us, but it's also telling us that we can glean from the type of answer it's given, especially because of the principle of Maisa Inish Chayvasa L'Nafshe, that a person doesn't bring with testimony against interest. That if the answer is ambiguous, there's clearly something wrong with the way it was understood. Anyway, that's the way the Gemara wants to position it. So we can have this discussion, but essentially, if you're an experienced person, you know how to ask the question.
Well, actually, it's not so much if the answer is ambiguous. They gave a clear yes or no answer. It's that if the answer isn't what you expect, that that when you're based in and you add and somebody brings a trusted person that comes in, and a very trusted person comes in and to talk about them, and they say the total opposite of what you expect, that then you have to get clarification. The answer wasn't ambiguous. It turns out but the fact that the answer wasn't what you expected meant that there was something going on, and you have to clarify.
Was it the routine interest of the Bezdin to know how a witness was competent to answer that question?
Say it again, David.
Was it not in the interest of the Bezdin, or part of their routine, to establish why a particular witness was competent to answer that question? Didn't they want to know, how are you competent to answer the question, whether he's a Rabbi or not?
Yeah, but they grilled him and they said, how do you know him, or all these questions. Exactly right. But again, it's the last 4 or 5 words of this Gemara that really gives us the real understanding of this whole parsha, meaning mistabra or maise inish v'vasel nafshe, that you have to go on the theory, the mistabra of the thought, that a person does not bring testimony against his interest. That's a principle. So if a person comes in there and you ask a question and he gives an answer that doesn't sound like it should be the answer for what this witness was there for, then you stop a minute and you say, wait a minute, did you get it? What was this done correctly? So the Bezdin itself can't self-correct and say, wait a minute, let's take a step back. What was the question? And then we can understand that the question was a ambiguous question. Again, lawyers don't like to and should never ask an open-ended question where the answer is yes or no. You ask the question, so if you want the answer to be yes, and if that is the answer, you ask the question, so the answer should clearly be yes.
And then your opposing counsel will say, objection, leading question. And the judge will say, can you rephrase it?
Right, but you can ask it in a way that it wouldn't be leading, but at the same time you want to be clear. And this is a good example. This is a good example of what might happen in real life when a lawyer and the person is not specific enough or doesn't have the acumen to understand. I've got to ask the question a certain way to get the answer, the correct answer that I want to get, without there being an ambiguity. Anyway, okay.
So this is almost like I'm wondering how this relates to our Fifth Amendment. I wonder if in halacha you also presume that a person would never say anything, nothing would ever come out of his own mouth that would be self-incriminating. Is that you almost don't need a Fifth Amendment in halacha if this applies to the person himself as well?
But Chaim, you're 100% right, because if a person is maida, you have to have a witness that supports him. In other words, we don't say that a person is competent to indict himself.
Oh, wow, okay.
Okay, that's what we say. He's not competent to indict himself. If he's not competent to indict himself, then in other words, just because he says it, there has to be someone that will say, yes, he is a swindler, or he is a bad guy, or a Ramai, or whatever it happens to be.
Interesting. I put in the chat here. Safaria actually has and Safaria's translations are not always 100%, but I think here it's perfectly ambiguous. The English translation they have, do you know about him that he is a swindler? Which you could take to mean, do you know about him, what his swindler status is, which is yes, we know, but no, he's not a swindler. Or it could be a long-winded way of saying, is he a swindler? In which case the answer should be no instead of yes.
We know, right. But that's the example of the ambiguity of the question, right? Okay, very good. Okay, so that's the last piece of this mission. Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to something else very interesting, because we've been talking about a person who finds and has simonim. How long does he have to hold it? According to one man Omer, it's only a very short period of time. According to the other one, it's sholosh regalim. So now the question becomes, and this is the next Mishnah, there are categories of fines that have different halachic outcomes depending on several things. So says the Mishnah, Kol davar she'oseh va'ochel, if you find, this is talking like about an animal, if you found an animal she'oseh va'ochel, that works, oseh, it does a ma'aseh, and eats, yaseh v'yochel, you should let him do his thing and eat. So they will offset. In other words, Rashi says, Kol davar she'oseh va'ochel, im avedu zu davar she'yecholin lahachilo eschar masav. If you find an aveda, about an animal, that can eat and get schar for his masav, which means that the finder is not out of pocket, you should let him work, produce, get money for the produce, and feed him. Below yimker also, and not sell him. Why? The finder should not sell him. In shohu balav miladarsho shekol odom noach lo b'mehemto she'akirabo kvar b'limdol ritzona. In other words, this is about the finder and what his obligation is to the owner. You find a chamor running around, no owner, and you say, okay, a hoshev tishivim, I have a responsibility, I've got to return it. But this donkey can be hired out for hard labor. And when I hire him out for hard labor, people will pay. So I'm not going to be out of pocket because he'll work, I'll get the money, I'll feed him, and I'll hold him. Why should I not sell him? Because the owner would rather have his own donkey, the one he knows he's been working with for years, than a new donkey that he'd have to buy from the money. So we put the onus, says Rashi, on the finder that he should hoshev tishive lo. He should return to him what's his. What's his? The original donkey. That's how the Chazal learned it out from either the hoshev lo, that it should be to him. What's to him? To him is the original donkey, because that's the one he knows and that's the one he worked with. So that's pshat in the Gemara here in the Mishnah. Now, what about an animal that doesn't work but eats? So who's the responsibility going to be on to feed it? The finder. So now you're going to put a burden on him that he has to go ahead and feed an animal that does not carry its own weight. Says the Mishnah, Yimkar, that he can sell. Shenema b'hashivosalo. You should return it to him. In other words, return it in a way that will be good for him, but also has to be good for you, the finder. Okay. How should you return it? So it says the Mishnah, how should you return it? What does it mean? Okay, so we said that you can either let him work and eat, or sell it and you have money. So ma'yeh b'damim, what are you going to do with the money? So now you have, in the second case of the she'ena osa va'ochel, you have money sitting, $100, let's say, sitting here because you sold it. So now there's a machlokes of tanoim. What do you do with the money? Rav Tarfon Omar, Rav Tarfon says yishtamish behen, you can use the money. Lefichach im avdu chayiv b'achriyosam. You can use the money, and therefore, if you lose it, you're chayiv b'achriyosam. Why? Because l'chayra, that makes you a what? Shomer sachar. L'chayra, it makes you a shomer sachar because you have money that was that belongs to somebody else, and you're using the money in yishtamesh. Therefore, lefichach hamad b'chayiv b'achriyosam. Makes sense. Rabbi Akiva Omer lo yishtamesh behen. You may not use the money. The money now has to go into your safe, and it's neutral. You neither expend it or you just leave it there until you either find the guy or Leo comes. Because you are no longer a shomer sacher, you're a shomer chinam, and a shomer chinam, there is no chiyuv of achriyosam of achrayos. Okay, so that's the way the Mishnah wants to present itself. That when it comes to, and this is important because we're going to have to distinguish between money and the object itself. So if you okay, so it's a neutral event, and that can go on for as long as it needs to. Again, you don't want to abuse the animal and overwork it, but you work the animal, and then the schar pays for the food, and that's it. It's a neutral event. But okay, so let's look at Rashi. So Rashi says, we did the first Rashi. How do you return it? In other words, how do you return it to him? Meaning the animal that does not work, how do you return it to him? That it shouldn't eat its value of the chatzi damav. In other words, it's worth $100, and you're gonna take out of your pocket $50 just to feed it to keep it alive. That's not a return that you have to feed it of your own pocket. And when you give it back to the owner, you're going to say, "Give me $50. That's what it costs me to keep your animal alive." That's not hashev tishivenu lo. Hashev tishivenu means give it to him in the form that he has it. So there has to be some offset. Now, the next Rashi, lefichach mefarish b'gemara, this is where the real issues come up. This word lefichach is what the Gemara is going to have to explain in great detail, and then because, in other words, just I'll give you a hint, the Gemara is going to ask, what do you need the lefichach for? Think about it. Look at the words of the Mishnah, and you see that both for Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, they give a position. Rabbi Tarfon says yishtamish behen. Why lefichach? It's logical. If you use it, you're a shomer sacher. Why do you have to say lefichach? And the same for Rabbi Akiva. If lo yishtamish behen, you're not a shomer sacher. Why do you have to say lefichach? It's patently clear that if you don't use it, you're not chayiv. Why lefichach? It's an extra. It seems to be an extra word. Says the Gemara. The Gemara is going to help us understand what this lefichach comes to tell us, because it's not so simple. It's not so simple. There is a havamina and a maskana, and we're going to see what the havamina and maskana are. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. All right, we're clear on the Mishnah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just throw out one point, and it's probably discussed someplace else, but maybe not. Just to take one other point, which is, okay, the idea you have a donkey, you have an ox, whatever, it can nominally make at least enough for you, whether you hire it out or use it in your own field to pay for what it's eating. Great. And then you keep it for as long as necessary until hopefully the person who lost it recovers it, claims it. And if you have an animal that doesn't make any money that way, you could sell it. So let's say, though, you find a dog, it's not going to make any money for you. So therefore, you're allowed to sell it. But the interesting twist is that a random dog off the street with no knowledge of exactly what type of dog it is, etc., is going to get the very bottom, very little, generally speaking. But if it turns out that this was some purebred special type of dog, it might be that it was worth $1,000, and you were only able to sell it for $50. And the person would say, "What? You should know, this type of dog, and I would have claimed it, and I would have paid you for all the food." So the question of whether would there be anything to say in some situation, maybe if, for example, if you did keep it, would you be allowed, and the person came to claim it, would you be able to bill them for the food and that kind of thing? A
Well,
whole a different question.
Yeah, so
Throw it
let me
out.
just make it, okay, so let me first say that there is a machlokes rishonim as to whether or not a finder can buy the animal. Okay, there's a machlokes rishonim whether the finder can buy the animal. There are some rishonim, I think it's the Rashba or some of the others, say he cannot because he's precluded against interest to buy the animal because it might not be a arm's length fair sale. That's one set of Rishonim. Other Rishonim say, what do you mean? You're trusting him. He's a finder. He's going to do the best he can. If the best outcome for the owner is that the finder should buy it, why don't you let him buy it? It'll be arm's length. We'll make sure that he does it right, and it'll be arm's length. So that's a separate machlokes. But I just want to put it out there because not everybody agrees that the finder can be objective. Now, the question then becomes, he has to do his best. If he does his research and overlooks or misses the fact that this was a pure breed, it could have been worth $500 and sends it for $100, we can't fault him because as long as he did the best he could, he did his due diligence. Chaval, he missed it. So someone would say, what? You sold it for $100? I could have gotten $500 on the market. Okay, but you can't hold him achroi if in fact he wasn't negligent. So that becomes a sort of an objective question. What did he do? Did he do the right thing? Or maybe nobody knew. This was, like you said, this could have been a breed that people didn't know, and someone got wind of it and said, I'm going to make a killing here, and I'll buy this animal for 10 cents on the dollar, and I'll make a lot of money. So
Is he
again,
Rabbi, is he
Yeah,
under
yeah.
any obligation to get an appraiser to give him a price?
that's a good point. So you have an obligation to do your due diligence. If it means getting an appraisal or speaking to some experts who know something about dogs, exactly right. You can't just cavalierly say, it's a dog, I'll sell it for a few bucks. I mean, again, Hashev Teshiva and put some responsibility on you, not undue responsibility, but some responsibility. So
Now,
you
if
can
he
say, I
breaks
did.
at $1,000 and he says, fine, I'll buy it, since nobody wants to pay $1,000, he says, okay, I'll buy it for $1,000.
Right,
Then it's good. And if the man comes, he gives him the $1,000.
that's right.
Yeah,
As long as he doesn't do something like sleight of hand to make it look like he was trying to cheat him. But yeah, an appraisal certainly is a very valid form of evaluation to figure out, especially with something that may have some subjective value. You don't know exactly, then you have to get someone's opinion, right? Everybody
Yeah.
has a different opinion of what the dog may be worth.
Yeah.
Okay, now, so that's okay. So that's the mission. Zak the Gemara ula oilam. Does he have to hold it forever? Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat and the potatoes here. Okay, you've got a guy. He found an animal. He wants to do the right thing. Frek the Gemara ula oilam. Does he have to hold it forever? Rav Nachman and Shmuel ad yud beis chodesh. Okay, so we had this machlokes earlier where we saw that there was a machlokes how long he had to hold it in the previous Mishnah. So here comes Rav Nachman and Shmuel, and he endorses the view of, I think it was Rabbi Yehuda, that you have to hold it 12 months. Zak the Gemara, Tanya Nami Hachi, I'll bring you a brisa to support that. Kol davar she'osav ha'ochel, the brisa says every animal that works and eats, kagon par of a chamor, a cow or a chamor, that says the Gemara, the brisa, mitapo behen ad yud beis chodesh. You work with them for 12 months, and if the owner hasn't returned, then mekan ve'elech sham demeim u'menichin. You sell it and you keep the money. In other words, you're not a chroi, even with an animal that offsets its own cost. You're still not required to hold it more than 12 months. You could say, what difference is it to you? It keeps working and keeps earning money. And we have the Rashi told us the principle that an owner really likes his own animal better than someone's animal. Why don't you just hold it for 3 years, 5 years? What difference does it make? Says the Gemara.
It's still a tircha. Yeah.
Right, it's still a tircha. Says the Gemara. No, we're not. A year is pretty long. We're not going to make him hold it more than a year. Now, that's one category. Sorry?
Rabbi, if he keeps it for a number of years, he's going to get so used to it and he knows what a good worker it is, he's not going to want to give it back.
He's not going to want to. But what happens also if the animal gets old and tired, and even though if it was in the hands of the owner, it might get old and tired as well. But if it's in the hands of the finder and gets old and tired, can no longer work, then it's reduced its value. So you have to sort of in your own mind think about what's going to be in the best. This is always about the best interest of the owner. What would the owner want me to do? Yes, the owner likes this animal. He'd like to keep this animal. I'm going to hold it for him. But the Gemara says, and the Chazal say, but there has to be a shiur. You have to balance the owner and the finder. The finder.
No, I meant if the person who found him,
yeah,
puts him to work and he has him for X number of months or years, and then he sees what a good worker he is.
Yeah.
He's going to be hesitant about giving it back to the original person.
He may also, right. But therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem. I think that machlokes rishonim that I mentioned before, and I'm not sure, but the question. So the question is, can the finder himself be the one who is using the animal and taking the money to feed him, or does he only have to hire it out to someone else who uses and pays for the service, and then he takes the money? There's a difference, right? I find a shiur, you need a shiur, I let you use the shiur, and you pay me for the work, and I feed the animal. That's one set. Another set is I need a shiur. I'm the finder. I need a shiur. So I'm going to start using the shiur, and then I'll feed him because I made money off the shiur. So it's not clear that the Rishonim who say you can't self-dealing, that you can self-deal here. That's the question. What I said before about self-dealing is that the Tosfos and the Rashba and other Rishonim say it's got to be arm's length. And because the finder is Nogeya B'davar, he has to do it outside. He can't do it himself. I'm going to pose the question to you, David. If I'm the one who's using the animal myself to work, and it's a benefit to me, is that an offset? Because I'm using it, and it clearly helps me, and I'm feeding it. So it's not 100% clear that machlokes rishonim doesn't apply here. It may even apply here that you can't self-deal. You can't use it and then feed the animal. It has to be arm's length, like the Rush and others, that you have to give it out to rent and then take the money that someone will pay you for the use of the shiur and chamor and feed the animal. Okay, well, I'll look into that, but that's the question. I think that's that may be the question is, can you self-deal here and do it, or does it only have to be arm's length? But nevertheless, there is an offset and it's okay. Therefore, according to that brisa, you hold it for a year. Now,
one more question.
Yes.
Particularly because it could go in para, example of a cow here. Where does if it's in a milk producing stage?
Milk producing, right.
So where does that fit in? Is that just treated as more like it's part of the work that it could do? Because think about it, typically the bull, you'll send it out in the fields to do physical work, but the cow, often the work, so to speak, of a cow, part of the value of the cow is the milk being produced on a regular basis.
Right. No, that's very valid. So if it was a female cow and it gave milk, that's its work, and then you sell the milk and then you keep feeding the animal. Exactly. And if it's a bull, like you said, then maybe you harness it and you take it out to the field and it becomes a plow animal or something. Right. So each animal has its own value. Now, says the Gemara, Agolim b'saychim. What about young calves? Not a cow. A young calf, the siphon, or a young donkey. In other words, says Rashi, where's Rashi? Rashi says, Agalim b'saychim dakin she'ein osin malacha. They are not gasin. Gasin means like heavy duty animals. You're talking about a dakin, a lighter animal that doesn't do work. Metapo behem shlosha chadashim. You only work with them for 3 months. We'll see why in a minute. Then 3 months, then you don't have to wait a year, says the Brisa. Now there's a third category Uzin v'tarnagolin. Uzin v'tarnagolin is like a goose, a duck, or a chicken, or a rooster. Tarnagolin is a rooster. Metapo behen shloshim yoim. You only hold them for 30 days. Why 30 days? Says Rashi, Tarnagolin zechorim she'ein matilim beitzim. They don't deliver eggs. A tarnagolis, by the way, we'll see in a minute, is like a cow. An egg producing chicken is a machine. You keep producing the eggs, you keep selling the eggs, you keep feeding the chicken, no problem. But a male doesn't have that value, unless for some reason a tarnagol, which I know, having been raised early in my life on a chicken farm, every farm has to have a rooster because the rooster is kind of the master of the hen house. But nevertheless, it doesn't have a intrinsic value. You can't do anything with it. So says the Gemara, only 30 days. Okay, so now we have three categories of animal, and you can see how the Gemara is thinking. If it can be used, a year is tops. And hopefully within a year, as the previous Gemara told us, shalosh regalim and a week, whatever, you find the owner. But if you don't find the owner, then you do a balancing test between the finder and the owner, and you say he did his work. It's a tircha to hold it more than a year. We're going to go weiter. Okay. So and then the category 2 and the category 3. Okay, that's the Gemara. And so we support Rav Nachman and the Shmuel from that brisa. Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, comes Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, and he says Tarnagolis, which I said before, a hen, ke behema gasa, is like a behema gasa because it produces eggs, and you can do that ad infinitum. Chickens can give eggs for a very long period of time. Here also, Tanya Nami Hochi, how do we know we're right? Because we learned from the brisa. What does the brisa say? Tarnagolis, behema gasa, and the top of behem shneim also chaydish. A tarnagolis and a behema gasa, like a parah and a chamor, you hold for 12 months. Now, pay attention here. This brisa is going to say something different. Agolim v'saichin, small calves and small donkeys, mitapel behem lamid yom. You only mitapel 30 days. The previous brisa said 3 months. This brisa says 30 days. Uzin v'tarnagolin, ducks or geese or roosters, the whole davar shetiplu meruba mischaro, or any other animal that its use, shetiplu, its work, its use, is more than its schar. Metapo shalosha yomim, 3 days, not 30 days, 3 days. Kavela sham demem menichim. Break the Gemara, kasha agolim b'saychin. Uzin v'tarnagolin. It's a stira between one brisa and another. One said everybody admits that a behema gasa or a hen is a year. No problem. The machlokes, the stira seems to be by the other categories. One says it's 30 days and one 3 months and 30 days. The other says it's 30 days and 3 days. So how do we reconcile the two brises that are giving us a different opinion on what to do with small donkeys or roosters or ducks or whatever? That's the kasha of the Gemara. Take a look. Rashi says, Tarnagol, okay, kibehema gasa, that a tarnagolis is like a behema gasa. Also, walchelas metapel bo yud beis chodesh yachal achili demei beitzim, because you can eat the value of the beitzim, and that can go on a long time. So with a hen, we consider that to be behema gasa. Okay, so l'chayra we have a stira, and the brises, emphatic the Gemara, lo kash. Kasha golim so he says uzin v'tarnagolin agolim v'saychin lo kasha. There is no stira, he says, between the small animals, donkeys and calves. Ha deraya v'ha diftuma, says Rashi. Ha diktani shloisha chadashim. When the brisa said 3 months, it's be'eretz mara. it's in a fertile land because you have a lot of grazing grass. So these animals can be there all the time. It's not out of your pocket that you're feeding them because there's plenty of food. So if there's plenty of food, hold it for 3 months. It's not such a tircha to hold it for 3 months when you're not out of pocket. Says Rashi, but when the other Brisa said 30 days, there isn't grass. It isn't fertile. You have to buy feed. When you have to start buying feed, it becomes expensive because there's no return on your investment. That says the Brisa, no, we're not going to require you to be the fumtzara, that you should have more aggravation and more work. Go ahead, hold it for 30 days, and then go ahead and sell it. So the distinction in that Brisa is between fertile land and non-fertile land. Good answer. Uzim v'tarna golden, namilo kasha, says the Brisa. There's also no stira between the two prices with regard to the geese and the rooster. Why? Ha berabreve, ha bezutre. Says Rashi, rabreve ochlen harbe. If they're big chickens, big roosters, or big geese, they eat a lot of food. They're called gimel yamim. We're talking about males that have no useful, in other words, the females can always give eggs, but the males have no useful return. And if they're big and they eat a lot, then you only hold them for 3 days. But if they're small, the zutre, if they're small, then they don't eat very much. Okay, hold them for 30 days and let's see what happens. So in other words, the Gemara is being very practical, that each brisa is talking about a different set of circumstance where you have animals that either can hold their own or they don't hold their own, and therefore you have to hold them for a shorter period of time. Yeah, hi.
Rabbi Grauman, frame this if you can. Are these guidelines to live by, or is this, the halacha of Hashavas Haveda? And if you don't do it, they're implying you're over an avera. I mean, what if a person just doesn't have the time or the ability to take care of a chicken, even one that produces eggs?
Well, Chaim, you hit it on the head. It is halachas, but it's halachas to live by. In other words, the upshot of this whole Gemara, and I think maybe Yale mentioned it earlier, is it's a balancing test. We have a mitzvah Shavas Aveda, but we also have a mitzvah. We know from Gemara that we learned time and time again, one yid values another yid's possession. I value what you own. I don't take your possession and say it's not worth anything. I don't want you to lose money. That's how a yid feels. But by the same token, if you burden him with doing something, then he's gonna, okay, I didn't see it. I walked by and I didn't see it. You're gonna say Hashem to Shivain. Wait a minute, I never saw it, right? How do you prove that he saw it? So you have to balance it. You have to say that there has to be a certain sort of sense. Now, it could be that even when you have a behemoth gasa, which you can certainly offset, like you say, what happens if I'm a traveling salesman? I'm never home. How am I, and I don't have a family, I don't have children or someone to oversee. How am I going to oversee this animal? It's going to be hefker, it's going to be a mess.
Right.
If I'm a traveling salesman, the halacha can't make me a chroi for something that I can't otherwise. I don't have my own animals for that reason. How can I take care of someone's animal? So,
or I'm a single person, I'm living alone, I'm not in good health, I can barely take care of my own, and now another one wandered onto my property.
Right. So that's why I say, I think your point is well taken, that this is a muster hachayim. This is a way of understanding how a yid should operate. There is a balancing test. If you're capable, says the Gemara, you should certainly do this, because that's Hashavas Aveda, and because you care for someone else. And the Rashi tells us that that someone who has a favorite animal would want that animal. So you have to be sensitive to that.
Right.
How much? Not forever.
Right.
12 months, 90 days, 30 days, whatever the case may be. But if you can't even do the basic because that's not your lifestyle, we're not imposing on you something that you yourself wouldn't do for yourself.
Right.
That's why I think it's a good question, and because it's a lifestyle. So the Gemara really is telling us this is how someone should conduct himself, and if he conducts himself that way, then he fulfills all the mitzvahs. Let's just do one more portion here, and we'll stop. What about an animal that does not work and eat, meaning that it has no return on its, it has no work. So what do? Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis learned, you have to return it. That's the pasuk in the Torah, in Devarim. See how should you return it. So listen to this. You can't make the choice to say, you know what? I found these very nice roosters. There's 10 of them. I'm going to sell one. I'll make the money, and I'll feed the other 9 from the money that I sold the Tarnagol or the calf or anything else. Says the Gemara, no, you may not. Either you tend them or sell them all, because you can't impute that the owner would have said, sure, sell one of them and feed the other 9. You can't do that on your own, says the Gemara, which is an interesting Gemara, because l'chaira, I might have thought, wait a minute, I got 10 chickens here. I can't feed 10 chickens. I'll sell one, I'll make enough money, and I'll feed the others. And if no one comes, I'll sell all of them. But by the time you sell all of them, you're selling only 9, because you've already used the money from one of the chickens. Says Rashi, Shelo yochel egel agolin, minha agolin, shenimtza lo yochel lo demei egel. You shouldn't sell one of the calves to feed the other agolin. That's how Rashi is telling us. So we have a very interesting, a clear picture that the Torah is telling us when it comes to Hashav Teshivim, you should, it's kind of all or nothing. Either you sell them all or you hold them all. You can't do a halfway, which I think it's a chiddush, because quite honestly, my reaction might have been, you know what? Sell one of them. I mean, at least you'll save the other 9. And if he comes back in time, he'll have 9 chickens, because I'm not a choy, me, the finder, I'm not a choy to feed them out of my own pocket. Teretz is sell them all. Sell them all, and then take the money. That's a very interesting change. Okay.
Another thing might be, what if you found these 10 chickens in a big crate, because somebody was sleeping and the crate fell off the cart, 10 chickens. You sell one of them to feed the other 9. The guy then comes a few days later to claim them, and you say, okay, give me a simon. There were 10 chickens. And it's like, no, there's only 9.
Right. But again, let me just pick up on that point, that understood in this whole Gemara is that the finder has to know what a simon is. That's a very good point. In other words, I'm going to sell these chickens and I'm going to keep the money. How do I know when the guy comes and claims it that it's his chickens? So your point is, give me a simon. Give me a simon. Oh yeah, the crate had a red or a green or a blue ribbon or whatever it is. In other words, he can't just sell it and then say, okay, whoever comes and asks me about the chickens, I'll give it to him. You have to have a simon. So he has to know the simon, and the number is sufficient. Because again, if he comes and said, I had 10 chickens, and the box was it, the 10 chickens is more like, oh, it was a red shirt. Okay, give me a little bit more. Tell me not just what the chickens come 10 to a box. So what, I'm going to believe you that I have 10 chickens. So it's a good point that he has to have a simon, and he has to know what the simon is when the guy comes. But as far as the chickens themselves, the Gemara gives us, again, this is a derech hachayim. We're not talking about what's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is sell the whole thing and keep all the money, as opposed to saving 9 and selling 1. So anyway, that's how the Gemara comes out. So we'll stop here, and next week, Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick up on the point that I was making at the very beginning. Is now we have a lot to deal with in the machlokes between Rav Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. It's a very interesting machlokes whether you can sell and use the money or not. Now the whole issue of the money becomes a question of Shai Mechinam, Shai Mesachar, or all that kind of thing. And that's a very interesting question. And Mitzvah Shem will deal with that next week.
Shkoyach.
Thank you,
very
Rabbi.
good. Very good.
Thank
Okay.
you. Have a good day.